Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Namaste, assalamu alaikum. Good evening, good night, or good morning to all of you. And we are so pleased to have people in this meeting from all over the world in different time zones. I am Shakira Mohammed out of Trinidad and Tobago, a teacher for the past 15 years. And this is our 175th edition of our Zoom public meeting. We wish to sincerely thank all of you who have contributed in whatever way to the success of this ongoing Pan-Indo-Caribbean and Pan-Indian Diaspora global project. For 174 unbroken continuous weeks, we have been here every single Sunday. And in the past 3 years, 7 months, and 2 weeks, we have featured 740 presenters from all parts of the world, speaking on 174 topics. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a weekly forum being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered research and publishing company operating since 2010. And like today, we often partner with the Amina Ghaffur Institute for the Study of Indentureship and its Legacies, led by Professor David Dean, who is here with us. Thank you for joining us. In order to continue this weekly program and to make it bigger and better, we are asking for your suggestions, volunteers, as well as donations, and you can contact Dr. Kumar Mahabir for details. Ladies and gentlemen, our moderator this evening or tonight is again Shalama Mohammed, the co-director of the Zoom platform, who is a business teacher and researcher from Trinidad and Tobago. She obtained her master's degree in business psychology from Franklin University in the USA. Shalama, welcome.
Thank you so much, Shakir. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Namaste, and a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for choosing to be here with us. So this public meeting will take the form of conversations with some very special elders, followed by questions and comments from members of the audience. The entire program should last about 2 hours. Our meeting is being recorded live and will be uploaded later on YouTube permanently for posterity. We are also live streaming on the YouTube channel of the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center. So welcome to all of you all on YouTube at this time. In order to avoid intrusions from trolls, Rabin Ram Singh, our IT manager, has muted everyone. Speakers, please do not admit anyone, do not unmute anyone, and please do not allow anyone to share your screen. Thanks so much for your cooperation. Today, our program is entitled Live Conversations with Indian Elders, Part 13. And our elders today are from Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania in East Africa. The history of Asian Indians in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania has its roots in the late 19th century, when many Indian laborers, traders, and entrepreneurs arrived on the shores of East Africa under British colonial rule. First brought in as indentured laborers to work on railways and plantations, they gradually settled and established thriving communities. Over time, they played a pivotal role in the economic development of these countries, particularly in trade and commerce. Despite periods of tensions and conflict, Indians have managed to preserve their cultural heritage, contributing significantly to the vibrant multicultural mosaic of East Africa. And our elders today are very special contributors in that regard. We want to start off with our first, who is Mrs. Zarina Patel. She's 88 years young. She's the managing editor of Awaz magazine and the founding member of the Kenya Asian Forum, who identified with multi-ethnic and multiracial groups that were struggling for human rights and freedom from exploitation. There's a lot more to this lady, and Mrs. Patel, I want to welcome you, and you can go ahead and you can share your life story with the members of our audience. Go ahead, please. You'll need to unmute your mic.
Can you hear me now?
We are hearing you clearly.
Yeah?
Go ahead, please.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I start by saying hello to the ICC and AGI organizers, moderators, speakers, and participants. Hamjambo from Kenya. At my age, we are not supposed to be seen or heard. So I want to start by sincerely thanking the organizers of this event for giving me the opportunity to be both seen and heard. Asante Sana, seriously, this is a great project. My name, as you were told, is Zarina Patel. I am a Kenyan and a woman. Those are my primary identities. People have multiple identities dependent on their current circumstances. So, yes, I'm a writer, I'm an artist, human rights activist, and I have a South Asian heritage. Someday, when we have a United States of Africa, I will be an African. I am not an Indian, as my foreparents came from Karachi, Mumbai, Surat, you name it. I also do not think that we in the diaspora need to be involved in the divisions and tensions of the subcontinent. Historically, South Asians have been visiting the East African coast for millennia. Some even ventured inland. They came largely as itinerant traders. The earliest settlements were along the East African coast. It was a South Asian pilot, Ahmad ibn Majid in Malindi, who guided the Portuguese fleet to India in the 15th century, the first Europeans to reach South Asia. There was a reverse migration of Africans to South Asia, some as slaves, others as soldiers, domestic workers, etc. A few rose to positions of political importance and power, known today as the Series. They are an easily distinguishable community in South Asia and can trace their history there back to at least 8 centuries. The first major settlement of South Asians in East Africa occurred when the Omani rulers established a base in Zanzibar and brought with them their South Asian bankers, business persons, lawyers, financiers, and other professionals. The second major settlement took place in Kenya during and after the building of the Uganda Railway in 1895. My maternal grandfather, Alivai Mullah Jivanji, first visited East Africa in 1890 when he came looking for new commercial opportunities. In 1895, he was requested by the British government to return to help build the Uganda Railway. In 1908, he was persuaded by the South Asian community here to return and take up the seat offered to him in the Legislative Council as the only non-white member. Among other firsts, he started the Standard newspaper and donated Jivanji Gardens and the Bora Mosque, all of which still exists today. He helped the British to build some of the infrastructure in early Nairobi and other towns. The racism and discrimination of the settlers from Europe and South Africa drove him into politics as he demanded equal rights for all. He established the Mombasa Indian Association in 1901, the East African Indian National Congress in 1914, and led delegations to the UK to meet the colonial officers and the press. in 1927, at the age of 71, he was once again appointed to preside over the Congress. A.M. Jivanji died in Nairobi in 1936, having lost his enormous fortune in his quest for equal rights, as well as the willful obstruction by the colonial government, but lauded as the grand old man of Asian politics in Kenya. I was born in 1935 in Nairobi, so I never knew him as such. I grew up in Mombasa under colonialism, and in 1963 rejoiced with Kenyans, black and brown, when the colonialists left, or we thought they had left. Soon after, the new president and his clique encouraged an anti-Asian hysteria, painting us as exploiters and an obstruction to the economic development of Africans. This propaganda was first initiated by the white invaders and their missionary allies in colonial times. As a result, large numbers of South Asians emigrated, and most of those remaining retreated into their ethnic enclaves. I, like many others, had taken Kenya's citizenship and decided to exercise it in a national context. I took up several assignments in the Mombasa Municipal Council, public schools, and the National Christian Council craft industry. I also felt the need to understand and validate, as a South Asian person, my claim to Kenya citizenship. For this, I read, studied, and asked questions, and learned for the first time about our great nationalists who had participated in Kenya's struggle for freedom from colonialism. Jivanji was not included in this group, as his history by now was not only suppressed, but even distorted. The Kenyan leaders having become allies of their colonial masters. However, he came to public notice in 1991 when I led a campaign to save Jivanji Gardens from being grabbed by some very high up Kenyan officials. It was my public role which brought into focus for me the ever-increasing disapproval of myself that I had been sensing from my family and community for a long while. I had realized that it was because I was a woman. So I worked hard at trying to improve myself. Then I read The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, and my worldview flipped over. I discovered that the problem was not me, but society. And I have never looked back since then. Hence, feminist is my second identity. And it has led me to become a human rights activist, a socialist, a global and independent-minded citizen. Am I a South Asian? Of course I am. But that is not my primary identity. I visited South Asia for the first time in 1963 at the age of 28 years as a tourist, and I loved it. The food, the sightseeing, the arts, the people, the women. But I was happy when our plane landed back in Nairobi. What does it mean to be Kenyan? Are we Kenyan when we are applying for a trade license? But when we go to a cricket match between South Africa and India or Pakistan, we clap for the latter. I don't need to say any more. Are we involved in the civil, political, or social life of our country so that we can make it a better place, not just for ourselves as South Asians, but for all Kenyans? To this end, I have written several biographies and a book on South Asian journalists, and participated in below and above ground movements, as well as the constitution making process to build democracy in Kenya. I edit Awaz magazine, now in its 23rd year of publication, and co-direct the Samosa Festival, which seeks to bring Kenyans of all ages and ethnicities together. Samosa Festival is right now engaged in a national exhibition on the life and history of one of Kenya's most revered patriots, Pio Gama Pinto. How much do we know of our history? As Joe Slovo has stated, an injury to one is an injury to all. Whose history do we study? What did the slave trade do to our continent? What are the effects of colonialism in South Asia and East Africa on us all? Which language do we speak? Mwalimu Nyerere in his time united all Tanzanians just by making Kiswahili compulsory. But the greatest divisive factor today globally is class. We live in an imperialist or capitalist system which ensures that the capitalists, the 1%, benefit from the sweat and labor of the 99%. It is gross, it is obscene, and is crumbling as the working people are rising up to build a new and better world. Capitalism's two main pillars are under attack: patriarchy and racism. And both areas concern the Kenyan South Asian community, for we are complicit in these biases. Our womenfolk are severely restrained to the extent that they do not even know how unliberated they are. Ordained as keepers of our izzat or honor, they pass on these vices to our youth. As for racism, the caste system and colonialism have left deep scars on our psyche. We need to discuss our drawbacks candidly and free ourselves of these negative traits. We have a lot to offer our fellow Kenyans, not as a separate and distinct community, but as an integral part of this great nation, together with other progressive compatriots. Let us secure our place on the right side of history. Another world is possible. As Arundhati Roy has said, on a quiet day, if I listen carefully, I can hear her coming. Thank you.
A very, very powerful introduction, ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, you said so many interesting things, and one of the things I took note of was this: patriarchy and racism concern Kenyan South Asian community. And you were saying because South Asians are complicit in advancing both, is that correct?
Yes.
Excuse me. So would it be the males or the females or equally complicit?
I think we live generally in a patriarchal society. It affects every aspect of our life. Just, I mean, if you just think of how do we compute our economic report at the end of the year, do we take into consideration the work done by women in the home? Do we? Yet that same work done by a worker, a home worker, is computed. Yeah. So it really affects every aspect of our society. How we plan our health services, our education services, everything.
Mm-hmm. So what proportion of the population there among the South Asians are involved in the professions? Females, I mean.
I mean, in Kenya, none.
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 I'm surprised.
We are not like in South Africa, where we came as indentured laborers, as farmers. We didn't. We came as artisans, masons, business people, traders. And we were actually discouraged from going into farming by the colonial regime at that time. There have been a few, they are largely wealthy owners of farms. But the working people are all non-Asians, they're Africans.
So I'll ask you again, in terms of the female non-Asians, sorry, amongst the female South Asians, how many are involved in the professions? How many are, for example, accountants, lawyers, doctors, etc.?
You know, there is quite a large number. I'm sorry, I can't give you any figures for this, as I have not studied it. But there are a lot. The point is not, you can be an accountant, you can be a lawyer, you can be a doctor, whatever. But it is your mental makeup, where your heart really is. Where do you consider home? Do you really consider Kenya your home? Okay? So it's, you know, just figures like that don't tell you the truth.
Yes, I agree. And we rely a little too much on figures without getting someone's opinion or someone's clarity on their own identity. And you've quite clearly identified what your identity is at this point in time. And I really thank you. Not very many people are brave enough to, number one, admit it, and number two, seriously introspect in order to be able to ascertain what their identity is. So I congratulate you on that. What have you been doing, or have you done anything significant for youth to have them establish their own identity or think along those lines?
The reason why, in the first place, we started Awaz magazine was, as I said, at independence time and beyond that, we collected a lot of historical material, and I wrote books using that material. But you know, how many of the, particularly young people, read today? Not many. So that was the reason we started ours, to put that material in an easily readable format that people could read, both Asians, Africans, and everybody. So that's one thing. Then we realized that just reading about things was not enough. We needed action. And that's why we started the Samosa festivals every year, bringing together people of, particularly the younger generation, together to share their culture, their ethnicity, their arts, their food, whatever. It has nothing to do with samosas, by the way. Yeah. Samosas is just a very tasty mix for everyone to enjoy. Sadly, one of the things we really wanted to do was provide a platform for South Asians to meet with Africans and interchange and have a continuing conversation. Unfortunately, we have not been able to attract South Asians to this platform in any sizable numbers. Most of our participants are Africans of different ethnicities.
Very interesting. There's so much more I want to discuss with you, but I want to invite members of the audience to pose their questions too. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Piramal, I see you with your hand up, and you can prepare yourself, so please unmute your mic. But let me just remind members of the audience, you are free to pose questions to Mrs. Zarina Patel. Please use the reactions button at the base of your screen. When you click on it, you will see the raised hand icon. Just raise your hand and I'll call upon you. So, Mr.
Shamila, hello, can I make a correction, please? I'm not Mrs. Zarina Patel. I'm Ms. Zarina Patel.
Thank you for that, Ms. Zarina Patel. So everyone, you can please feel free to go ahead and to pose your questions or your comments. Mr. Piramal, can you unmute your mic? We have Mr. Bobby Piramal from South Africa who wants to ask you a question. Let me just get him audible. Ravin, can you please unmute Mr. Piramal? Okay, we seem to have lost him, but we also have Mr. Banagal Pereira who would like to ask you a question, and he's unmuted. Go ahead, please, Mr. Pereira.
Yeah, hi, Zarina. Just wanted to thank you for the wonderful commentary you just made. And, you know, I think we are in such a different era now. It's 50 years. I'm based in the United States right now. I left Kenya 50 years ago, but my heart still is in Kenya. I still love Kenya, and I'm so passionate about all the work you've already done. So I just wanted to just raise my hand and thank you for the good work. And I'm ready to participate in any of the discussions. But thank you, Zarina, and to Zahid as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinny. Nice to be in conversation with you.
Yep.
And welcome home anytime.
Yeah, thank you,
Come and
Zarina.
visit us. Come and visit us.
Yeah, thank you, Zarina.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Mr. Pereira. We really seem to have lost Mr. Piramal, and it's unfortunate. But we do have another question for you, and that is, what cultural form or forms did Indians in Kenya create or recreate?
Sorry, I haven't quite understood that. Can you repeat?
Sure. So what we're trying to ascertain is what kind of Indian cultural forms have been created by Indians or recreated by Indians in Kenya.
You know, basically, South Asians came to this country as um, traders, business people. That was their intention in coming, and that's what they did. That's the majority. Okay? So, cultural and artistic and literary pursuits are few and far between. Uh, so, our impact is largely, as I think it was said, as you said at the introduction, that it was economic. And we have made a huge contribution economically to this country. It is very regretful. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't say regretful, but the reality is that culturally and in literary terms, yes, we have made a contribution, but I think we could have done a lot more.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Mr. Farooq Verji, you had a question. Would you like to unmute your mic?
My question is, when we talk about patriarchy in the Indian South Asian community, was it any different among the Europeans? And I think this distinction came about because of economic status and economic power. So it wasn't that the women were being discriminated, the males were the main income earners, income generators. Even in Canada where I live, it's a male-dominated society.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are living in a patriarchal system, okay? Yeah. But unfortunately, with the South Asians, it is complicated by the fact that we hold on the feudal structures, which are combined with religion. And that is a huge impediment to our progress.
I think in a Ismaili community, sorry.
It's a matter of degree, but it exists everywhere.
If I may say so, here in Canada, women are becoming increasingly dominant because they are well educated, they independent financially, and we have a very high rate of divorce. I'm from the Ismaili community. So education has been a great liberator, but it's also weakened the family structure.
May I say two things here? One is the family structure is a capitalist structure. It is built on the free labor of women. It is built on that. So the family structure as it stands, I'm not against the family, okay? Yeah. But as it stands today, it is patriarchal and it is extremely unjust, okay? Secondly, we have this notion that because we are out in the public, we dress well, we go everywhere, we are educated, we have degrees, and so we are liberated. My personal experience is that that's not so at all. Here in Kenya, we have, believe me, since the last constitution in 2010, we have been fighting to get a 2/3 majority of women in our parliament. You know, we can't get it. It's not only the men who don't want to get it, who are struggling it. It's the women in parliament. Because they think like the men.
Our Prime Minister Trudeau has 50% women in his cabinet. He's the first Prime Minister in Canadian history who's made sure that women have parity in governing.
But let me finish what I was going to say. That is fine. I mean, that's a step forward of getting the 2/3. But it's not really helping women. Are those women parliamentarians going to fight for a better working conditions for the domestic workers?
Good
For
point.
the salaries to be raised?
Good point.
No.
Good point. Good point.
They're the biggest enemies of the ordinary people.
Yeah.
So you have to dig deeper. You have to look at the reality.
Women are paid less for equal work.
Yeah.
In Canada. Yeah. Thank you.
Ms. Patel, I have to thank you so much. We have a, Nader, I'm going to give you, if you can just take 2 minutes, please, because our second speaker needs to leave. He has an appointment. And so we would not want to delay him further, but I would love for you to be able to pose your questions to Ms. Patel. 2 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. It's actually not a question, just a comment, but Zarina, I'm the son of Mushtaq Jivanji, a distant cousin of yours. We visited you 10 years ago in Nairobi, and it's just a pleasure to see you here. And you're an inspiration then, and you continue to be one. And I'm just so happy to see you here. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Wonderful. Thank you. Ramnik Shah, can you just make it 1 minute, please? Go ahead. You need to unmute very quickly. Ramnik Shah. Yes, can you unmute your mic?
Can you hear?
We're hearing you now. Go ahead, please.
Right. Okay. Look, my impression was that this was going to be a meeting of a distinguished panel of elders who have been named, obviously Zarina Patel, Feroz Nauroji, and Farooq Tolpan. I know all of them. They know me. But I thought it would be a good idea if you gave each of them, you've given a lot of time to Zarina, and which she has graciously and fruitfully utilized. But I thought it would be a good idea if you gave the other two an opportunity to present their, to introduce themselves and speak about their own lives, so that we can then coordinate and we can then talk collectively. We can ask collectively the panel about all sorts of things, all sorts of issues that may arise in the course of our discussion. I would have thought, I am 82, I fall into the same category as our elder member, but I'm not as distinguished or accomplished as as the people, the trio are. But
yes,
they.
Mr. Shah, I want to thank you so much for your suggestion. Mr. Shah, I'm sorry, but I've muted you because we do indeed need to bring on Mr. Nauroji. Ordinarily, that is what you are suggesting is exactly how we do it. We generally will have all our panelists speak and then we will have a discussion after. Unfortunately, given the nature of our very special panelists today and the time zones in which they are living and their agendas, we are unable to do that. So we thought we would capitalize on Ms. Patel being here first. It's very late where she is. And so we've been able to take the questions and comments from you all. So I want to thank you so much. At this point in time, though, let me just bring on Mr. Nauroji. Ms. Patel, you have been absolutely wonderful. And Nader said it perfectly that you are quite an inspiration. Ma'am, I would love to spend an hour or two with you. And I hope you will return. Thank you so very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we want to bring on now our second speaker, and this is Mr. Feroz Nauroji, who is 83 years old. He's a human rights lawyer whose family came from Gujarat in India in 1896 as engine drivers on the Uganda Railway. His father, him and his children were born in Nairobi. And Mr. Nauroji has authored a book on his family's history, and I'm hoping that we are going to hear some of the contents of that book. Welcome, sir. Go ahead, please, with your presentation. Kindly unmute your mic. Okay, right.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you. May I say, I am able to stay longer. We've arranged, so it's all right. And may I say, take a short moment for a personal. Ramnik, it is delightful to see you, to hear you, and may I correct him, and Zarina will join me, as would Farouk, that Ramnik is no less distinguished than anybody else. And it is so good to have you. Thank you. Shalima, may I go straight to making two major issues. One of them is to speak to the Caribbean and the old indentured diaspora places, that the East African experience is different from the indenture experience of the West Indies, Fiji, early South Africa, Mauritius, Malaya, and so on. Our indentured experience came much, much later than yours. I'll come back to it in a moment. And it is this, that the indentured labor in East Africa took place from 1896 onwards, when the first of the coolies, artisans, came over. Whereas the indentured experience in the plantation economies commenced in 1838 onwards. And so we come late to this exercise, and our experience was the building of the railways, the construction of the railway from Mombasa to the Lake Victoria. And it was not a sedentary. There were no plantations on which the coolies would live and stay on. It was a labor work, moving with the railhead as it moved forward from Mombasa to Savo, to Nairobi, Nakuru, and Kisumu. And people lived in tents because they were workers. They didn't have any families with them. And the collective experience of the railway building stayed on in a very limited way in East Africa, particularly Kenya. There were about 31,000 workers brought together with about another 3,000 of artisans, and then another few thousands of the people who would operate the railway, like engine drivers, as you have mentioned, guards, telegraphists, postal, and so on. Of those, of these 33,000 and so on, about 6,000 died, 6,000 were invalidated back to India during the construction. And the effect of that was that the purpose of the indentured, from the point of view of the villages and towns from which workers were recruited, was that the wage earner was lost to the family once they were invalidated. Another 3,000 died. And the rest went back to India, and about 6,000 plus stayed on in Kenya. And so we have a much smaller pool of persons who share the experience of those years of the construction and the coming and the and the tie that we have to that time, it has faded very, very substantially. That's one consideration. A second consideration, which is different again from the West Indian experience, Caribbean experience, is that we in East Africa were very much closer to India. And so the social customs, practices that we engaged in were still closer to India than the Caribbean could manage at that distance. Thirdly, was the consideration that in relation to the the proximity of India, was also the consideration that we were able to move back to India, or members of the family would move back to India, even though, like Zarina said, she went 28 years after she was born in Kenya, and so on. But the impact of India remained, and the impact of the Indian independence movement was extremely strong on Kenya. This was not only because we were close to, but because the Kenya political leadership of the Indian community, then called Indians, was constantly in touch with the Indian National Congress in India. And so Zarina's grandfather was in touch with what was happening in India, more than in touch, in consultation, and vice versa. And the Indian struggle for equal rights was very strongly connected to Gandhi, to Charlie Andrews, who was Gandhi's emissary in Kenya, and Mr. Virji's family, for example, and Nadi's, that they were, at that time, Hussein Virji was the president of the Indian National Congress. These people would travel to India. The Congress people would come back, and M.A. Desai brought Sarojini Naidu to be president of the East African Indian National Congress twice. And so these are influences that came in very strongly into Kenya, as opposed to Fiji, for example, or Trinidad, or any other place in the plantations thing. The other consideration is this, that sorry. The values that the indentured laborers brought with them is something that is being nurtured differently in the West Indies, in Fiji, and part of South Africa. And these values have been now acknowledged as one of the part of the baggage that they brought with them. In the whole of the indentured workers, the whole emigration of the Indian workers is now honored in a World Heritage Site in Mauritius. It is the Pravasi Ghat in Port Louis in Mauritius. And the citation of UNESCO, which determins this, is as follows. I quote now, this is 2004, 2006. The buildings of the Aprawasi Ghat, the remains of an immigration depot of 1849, are among the earliest explicit manifestations of what was to become a global economic system based on their labor, and one of the greatest migrations in history. And we haven't touched on that, but I'm coming to the next part. Quote, this sole surviving example of this unique modern diaspora represents not only the development of the modern system of contractual labor, but also the memories, traditions, and values that these men, women, and children carried with them when they left their countries of origin to work in foreign lands, and subsequently bequeathed to their millions of descendants for whom the site holds great symbolic meaning. And may I go back to this? What did the workers bring with them? They brought memories, traditions, and values. And it is these values that they have passed, these memories, values that they have passed on to the generations that followed. Now, over the 100 years plus now, the question is the diaspora living with the values that the indentured workers brought? What is the effect of living 100 and plus years away from the origins of these values and traditions, and so on? But there is another factor which the South Africans will immediately recognize, and it is this, that in addition to the indentured workers, there came to South Africa what the South African Indians call passenger immigrants. They were not indentured, they were not artisans, they were not manual laborers. These were traders. And so as time went on, the number of persons whose descendants remained in South Africa, but I'm talking now of Kenya, the number of people who are today now in the diaspora in Kenya are mainly, overwhelmingly, the descendants of the passenger migrants, of the traders. And there is a third difference between the West Indies and us and Fiji, that when the workers came in 1896 to Kenya, there were already about 15 to 20,000 Indians already in Zanzibar, Lamu, and the east coast of Africa. So that the isolation that a person in the West Indies felt was not the same as the fact as a worker who knew that in Mombasa there were other Indians, in Zanzibar there were many other Indians, and so on. So now, looking back with all these factors, it is now the values of the traders that is now dominant in the diaspora, not the values of the workers who came. And that is one explanation why Zarina is saying to you, we do not find people who are reading what Awaz is saying, what Awaz is recording. Ironically, Awaz is recording the achievements and the values and the memories and the traditions of people who came at that time and whose descendants or the remnants of the descendants look back, but they are fewer and fewer. And so this it's not what Zarina and Zahid are doing is not valuable, it's invaluable. It is are interested in they're not interested in retrieving this, they're not interested in recording it, and they're not interested in passing it on to their young people. So Shalima, when you ask Zarina, what are the young people, how are they reacting? Zarina tells they're not connecting with this. And therefore, what we are calling the diaspora of the indentured laborers is perhaps now no longer that dominantly. It is the diaspora of the trading passenger merchant migrants. And therefore, those values are very much dominant in relation to profit, in relation to the activity. And so Shalima, when you ask what is the proportion of the professions, Zarina pointed out, yes, there are a lot of professional women in every field, medicine, accountancy, architecture, what you name it. But collectively, the impact of these things comes from those who are dictating the economic activity. And now here comes another effect of this, and it is this. For a long time, the question, how would the Indian community, Coolie community, South Asian community, whatever identity we choose to give at the moment, and I'll come to it in a very short while, that how would they relate to the majoritarian governments that came in 1963, 61, 62, 64. And for a while, the answer was that those who had money would create their own individual solution about trade licensing, about deportation, about grabbing of land, about injustices, by exchanging the receipt of some justice by the giving of part of their profits. Now, it has taken 50 years for this expectation and wrong behavior to become less and less, and for the community to be able to say, we don't have to pay protection money. We are Kenyans, and everybody is the same. And it took the majoritarian public 50 years of repression to understand that color, which is not black, is not the source of repression, but that there are other factors, regardless of color, that black upon black is as bad as black upon white or black upon brown. And so the question arises, what then are we as Kenyans? And so the question arises, yes, we are Kenyans. That is very clear, both emotionally, both in terms of how we express our creative work, that this creative work comes out not as a memory of India, or not as an expression of what the family was in India, but of what creative work represents within the heritage or the legacy within Kenya, its history, and Kenya itself. So the second aspect of that is that what then is the effect of us being 120 years in Kenya or Tanzania, etc. And so this is what Mahmood Mamdani says of what he thinks. Sorry. Yeah, this is what.
Mr. Naroji,
Yes.
pause for 1 second, please. Just
Yeah.
pause for 1 second, please. Dr. Mahabir, could you kindly restart the recording?
Yeah, that was a glitch. Go ahead.
Has it resumed?
Okay.
Just 1 second, please, Mr. Naroji. I want to make sure that the recording has resumed. Continue, please, sir.
Thank you. This is what Mahmood Mamdani writes about the issue of identity, and it is this: we are Kenyans, but what is that identity which comes to us from the original migrations? And he says this: we need to give a deep thought to who we really are and what is our relationship to Africa and African society. One cannot live in this land as if one were a visitor. You cannot be a permanent visitor. That is a ticket to permanent insecurity and permanent irresponsibility. This mindset is at the source of our continuing social and political isolation. We are not South Asians, Indians, Pakistanis, or Bangladeshi, for South Asians live in South Asia and are committed to making a future there. Nor are we overseas South Asians who are part of a South Asian diaspora after a temporary sojourn overseas. True, our origin is South Asia, but our present is African. Many of us hope to make a future in Africa. We are Africans of Asian origin, Asian Africans. So these are the identities that we are juggling with. And as we read the history books, the description of us, we are coolies, we are Asiatics, we are Indians, we are Asians, we are South Asians, we are Asian Africans. What is it, and where do we begin to rest? And in this respect, there is an exhibition of the Asian African heritage, which is being installed in the National Museums of Kenya, which seeks to answer this by looking at the history of these people and their heritage in the context of Kenyan history in Kenya. And so the importance is not on nomenclature, although that is important, just as it was important for the African Americans to put the correct label, because like us, their label lay in a colonialism vested in slavery. It's a discriminatory thing, but most important of all, we must define ourselves and give to ourselves what we consider is that identity, and not wait for North American or West European academics to define us as South Asians. I have not seen people describe, talking about Europe. They don't call themselves West Europeans. They say these people we're working on and writing our papers on are French, or we are doing social studies in Holland, or we're looking at the Spanish this and the German that. And there is no need. There is not even no need. It is important how we define ourselves, because the young people do not know what to call themselves. And they are torn between being Indian Indians, Kenyan Asian Africans, or British youngsters. And so they are in Britain, they finish their universities, they have friends there. They come to Kenya for their holidays or for their weddings, and go to India to buy the saris and the jewelry, and find young men who are equally confused as to whether they want to be British executives or they want to be leading entrepreneurs in Kenya, and yet have a link with India. So in these things, the identity is important now, and we hope that the exhibition is saying you do not have to give up any identity to become what you really are. And so it's extremely important that you retain the historical strengths. And when we do that, without in any way claiming an exclusive identity, we begin to have the strength of the values from India. It is so important. Every person who is living outside India and having young children has to decide whether these young children know how to get up when visitors come, how to greet them politely, and then go back into the kitchen and get a cup of tea for the visitors. This is not how American youngsters do it. So how do you do that? You do that, you don't say to them, don't be American. You say to them, you are American or West Indian or Kenyan or what? And you are also having a set of values which comes historically from you. And those values saved us. How did it save us? You can't live in a place like Fiji. You can't live in a Natal sugar plantation. You can't live in a colony where you are disregarded. You can only live there by helping each other. And so that the values of education remained in Kenya with us, not through the colonial government, not through one community, but because communities helped each other to have a primary school, a dispensary. And the primary school then became a high school. The dispensary became a clinic. The clinic then became a hospital. And it is these values, very important values, that the labels are going to be important for us to anchor these values. And it's not, we are not alone in this. In Kenya, the the question is, what is, we say, we Kenyans are hospitable. It's visible when you come to visit us. But the question is, how do you pass that on to your children? By them seeing you hospitable, certainly. But most important, by telling them that this is not a strange characteristic. And to those people from South Africa, like Muhammad and their family, it is important for Africa, South African Africans, East African Africans, to understand that we have to acknowledge the label of African values. And so Ubuntu is not some exotic textbook expression for foreigners to write about Africa. Ubuntu is how people behave at home. You come to Kenya and you go to any home in Kenya, you will not leave from there without a cup of tea or a glass of water. It would be an offense to the host and discourtesy from the guest, because Ubuntu says we are connected. And these are values, therefore, that are both African and Indian. And so when Tutu was asked, Desmond Tutu was asked about Gandhi, he said this was a key thing, but Gandhi learned things from South Africa, which are in Satyagraha. And so let us look at this joint legacy that we have and give a joint identity to ourselves so that our children and generations can be at home in South Africa, in London, the US, India, anywhere. And these are the ongoing debates that are in our minds, and Mahmoud is looked deeper into this. And I would recommend that Shalima, Dr. Mabe, that you try and get Mahmoud to come and speak to us. Thank you.
Certainly, we would love to have him come and speak to us. And I want to thank you for clarifying the differences between us and the Indian diaspora, who are children of the indentures, I like to say, and those of you all who are children of the railway employees, the railway operators and the artisans and so on. So thank you so much for a very, very revealing conversation. I want to bring in now Mr. Mohammed Keshavji, who is, ladies and gentlemen, the person responsible for helping us to organize today's panel of very distinguished guests. And I would like to have him ask his question to Mr. Feroz Naroji. MK, please go ahead and unmute. Dr. Mahabir, can you unmute Mr. Keshavji? Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Shalima. Feroz, thank you for that brilliant analytical framework. I gather that problem of who are we and how do we articulate an identity 50 years after most of these countries have become independent is still a critical problem. I confront this on the chat time on South Africa. Are we Indian South Africans? Are we South African Indians? Are we Indians? Are we Africans? And it's a constant conundrum. Where do we fit in, particularly at a time when we see post-independent societies are struggling through a whole morass of problems, corruption, difficulties, populism, xenophobia. These are issues that identity is not static. And you find that our identity today is still under much challenge given what's happening in the Indian subcontinent today.
Yep.
That's also going to have an impact on who we feel we are, whether we're living in Britain or America or Fiji or Nairobi or Natal. So I think it's a very, very interesting point you made, Firoz, for which I want to thank you. You're so analytical in your thinking and in your articulation. That's the point I wanted to make about identity is one of the most complex issues. And I just wanted to mention that just literally a week ago, I helped launch a book of a man called Patrick Pietroni, and his book is called The Tyranny of Identity. If I may suggest that this book is just hot off the press, and the person is called Pietroni, Pietroni, who comes from Greece, from Cyprus, with a multiplicity of identities. And he was telling us that your identities are like a babushka doll. Every one of us has a babushka doll in us. And all these identities at some time in our life, we encounter them. We can't deny them because they become part of us in the same way as a Matrushka doll. And I would strongly recommend that that book has given me a new insight, which I think would be of tremendous interest in the Indian indentured diaspora and its own complexities. Those are just the 2 points I wanted to make, and to thank you for that. Thank you, Shalima.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shalima,
Mr.
shall I respond to
Yeah.
Mohammed? Sure.
Please do.
Thank you. Mohammed, thanks so much for pointing out ways to look at it and move it. I'll give a more practical, temporary answer. We have to act as Kenyans under Kenyan history, under Kenyan law, under Kenyan politics. Let me ask you a question. Did anybody in South Africa ever say, who is Freni Jinwala? Is she Indian, South African Indian, Indian South African? No, not at all. They simply thought of her as a South African exemplifying the total force of all that was good in South Africa. And she was the same to everybody, and she fought for everybody. So I'm saying, whatever you're doing, if you're a doctor, you're an accountant, you're this, you're that, keep this maker of us, Freni, the maker of us, so many thousands of young people, she made us. Keep her in mind and do that. And you can't go wrong. You can't, no one looked at her color. All they feared was that look or a sharp word. And no one thought she did it for her benefit. She did it everything for the benefit of 50 million people. So we would be good citizens to the best. Now, what is our duty to India? That's our duty to our countries. What is our duty to India? As you pointed out, there are things going on in India which also complicate our identity concerns, as you pointed out. I'm saying the diaspora has to speak up to India about the direction it is taking in relation to its Muslim minority, to its Dalit minority, to its Christian minority, and its ongoing repression to anybody who disagrees with anything that a top cadre says. That is our duty, to speak up and say, number one, you have a constitution and you are going completely against it. Number two, you have values of tolerance, of care, which you are breaking. Number 3, you sent us out with these values. And those are the values that that man, Mohandas, discovered how to use politically, not in India, but he went to the place where people were going for gold and diamonds, and he found Satyagraha because he valued that more than those diamonds and things. And those diamonds and gold are harming this world to an extent that we are destroying ourselves in many other ways. But we have a right, because we seek to uphold those values, we have a right to tell you that you are contradicting your own values and our values. So I would ask that the diaspora does not keep quiet to what is going on in India. It is that Canadian Indians must speak up in support of the things that are being corrected in relation to India. It in no way contradicts our inextinguishable hold that India has over us all. We are 26 million people outside. We have been there for more than 100 years. Muhammad, your family is now coming to 150 years out of India. Mine, 120. But still, that country, I cannot let go. But it in no way is either disloyalty or traitorous to say to India, do not go this way. This is not the way of my heritage. I come from a community which came 1,000 years ago to India. We are Zoroastrians, Parsis, and Iranis, and we sought refuge. And we got refuge, and the promise of refuge was, you will not be harmed. And our promise was, we will not take up arms against the Raja who is giving us refuge. It was pointed out to me in Nairobi by a colleague, Mr. Sarvaiya, advocate. He said, has India broken that promise? I said, no. He said, have you all broken the promise? I said, no. He said, it's one of the longest promises kept in history. And so we will keep that hold, but we will say, stop this.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mr. Naroji, you are extraordinary. I have to thank you so much for all that you've shared with us. I wish we could keep you speaking for another hour or so, just like Ms. Patel. Unfortunately, I know you have an important appointment and I don't know how much time you have left. So I just want to remind you and thank you so very much for being here. Mr. Pereira, I know you had a question. Sorry, Mr. Naroji. Mr. Pereira, I know you had a question, but I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to hold on that. Perhaps you can put it in the chat. We do have our third speaker, and at this point in time, it's 4:30, so we certainly want to have him be heard. Mr. Naroji, how much longer will you be with us?
I can stay on.
Excellent.
on.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Mr. Pereira, if you can just hold, perhaps we can have that question come on later. I want to introduce our third person now, and this is Dr. Farooq Topan. He's 82 years old. He was born in Zanzibar, in Tanzania to be exact. He's Professor Emeritus at the Aga Khan University in London and an honorary fellow of the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. He's written many books, particularly on Swahili culture. Welcome, Dr. Tupan, and thank you so much for your patience.
Right. Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, may I thank Dr. Umar for inviting me, for Mohammed for facilitating this, and Shalima for our conversation. And what I would like to do, coming last, I think has an advantage, because you see the way that the argument and the discussion has sort of proceeded in the talk. But I had prepared some slides. Some perhaps are now superfluous, but I will go through them anyway, because we might get to points of discussion. When I was asked to talk about myself, I sort of had second thoughts. And I felt that perhaps it would be better if I were to talk about my grandfather, because the values that Firoz Bhai talked about, that Zarina Bhai talked about, that those values are reflected very much in our pioneers, those who had come before us. And perhaps if I were to sort of talk about that and place it in the context of Zanzibar of the 19th century, that might give us some discussion. I do have also some comments on the points made by Zarina Ben and Firoz Bhai, particularly about the young, because I think we are looking at the young in a way that perhaps we need to revise a little bit how we sort of perceive them. So having said that, now can I just try and share this? Let me see if I can do that. Can it be seen?
Yes, we are seeing your slides, but would you be able to put it into full screen mode?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I'll see if I can do that. Oh gosh, I can. I'm not able to for the time being. Do you mind if I just spoke on it as such?
No problem. It's fine if you want to use it as it is.
Okay, so let me begin by just saying that a point made by Firoz Bhai, and that is the influence of history and geography has given rise to this global spread of Indians. But I would like to see it as a diverse unfolding of narratives. The narrative in Trinidad and Fiji, as he said, is different from the narrative in East Africa. And the East African narrative is really shaped by the Indian Ocean and the monsoon winds and the push and pull factor. Pull in the sense that East Africa was pulling Indians from the western side of India because of its economic and conditions and the hope and aspirations. And the push from the other side has been, of course, the search for a better life. In that way, Indians, wherever they've spread, and particularly in East Africa, they have not spread in a place where there is a vacuum. Of course, there were people there, and it is those monsoons who brought the Arabs and the Persians, and of course, then the Indians. And therefore, in East Africa, we have this very cosmopolitan nature of society, whereas there is internal Indian diversity, but that internal Indian diversity, and what do I mean by that internal Indian diversity? I mean people from India who have different religions and different persuasions, the Hindus, the Muslims, the Goans, the Parsis, etc. And there is also an external diversity in the sense that there you have then these Indians are living with the Arabs and with people who consider themselves as descendants from Persia, etc. So I've given here a map, and it just shows how small, in a sense, this space is, which had to be traversed from Africa to India and India to Africa, etc. So that is something just to be kept in mind as such. And this is a map again which showed the winds, etc., which come from one area to another. Okay, now what has been the Indian contribution to East Africa? Well, in trade and commerce, ranging from these very large firms to the small dukawalas, who have played a part and whose acknowledgement is now beginning to emerge in terms of how these small dukawalas went out onto the East African mainland and really opened it up in their own way. We have the cuisine, we have fashion, we have entertainment. Later, when the Indian industry started exporting Indian films, that became part of African Indian culture in East Africa. Language and literature, politics during the colonial period and post-independence, which Zarina Bai touched on and Firoz Bai touched on those pioneers who also participated in the political struggle. But to me, what is interesting now is that these people now, people who have actually grown up and lived their lives in East Africa, are now beginning to write memoirs and biography. And this is satisfying to a certain extent the curiosity of the young. And there is also rising levels of acknowledgement. Firoz Bai talked about this Kenyan museum. That is very interesting in itself, that narrative of that museum, because it was started as a temporary museum years ago. People contributed their resources and of objects as well as money, and that was set up. And later, that then became very slowly something which people identified with. They wanted to go and see it. The first exhibition was in the form of a boat, which to signify the connection between India and East Africa. And now, of course, it is a fully fledged institution. Now, then we go back to Zanzibar. I would like to place Zanzibar in the 19th century because it is from the 1830s up to the end of the 19th century that Zanzibar became what one scholar has called a primary node of linkage for three areas: the Eastern African region itself, and then across the Indian Ocean up to the Far East, and then with the western coast of the United States. And therefore there was, during that time, especially under the Sultan Bargash from 1870 to 1888, there was trade and economic stability. His reign brought prosperity to Zanzibar, introduction of modern aspects such as gas, street lights, railway, printing press, and different forms of architecture, which is very important because architecture has formed a link between East Africa coast and India, very much so. And then, of course, we have the Indian traders and philanthropists, the firms of Jairam Sivji in Zanzibar, Kawas Jidinsha, in fact, the coast of East Africa, Tare Topan, my grandfather, and the beginnings of this huge firm of Karimji Jivanji at that time. My grandfather, Tare Topan, he came to Zanzibar in the mid-1830s. So up till now, it is what, almost 2 centuries. And he started work with the firm of Jairam Shivji. He gradually built his own firm. He traded in those areas which I talked about within East Africa, India to China, and on the other side to the United States. In fact, there is in Peabody Museum a painting of a boat called the Tare Topan, which was launched in Salem, Massachusetts in 1870. And of course, he provided assistance to David Livingstone, Henry Stanley, and He visited London in 1875 with Sultan Balghash, and he was later knighted by Queen Victoria in 1890 for the efforts to end slavery. But one feature I find of these firms, Jairam Sivji, Kausidin Shah, Karimji, Jivanji, Taratopan, all had not only that spirit of entrepreneurship, but also there was a spirit of philanthropy. They gave back to the communities. And Jairam Shiji, for instance, there is a beautiful Anglican church built in Zanzibar at the end of 19th century. The land for that was given by an Indian firm. Taratopan built a dispensary. He contributed money to the establishment of what was known then this UN Smith Madrasa School, which is now known as the Haile Selassie School. So there is that way, this interaction. This is Taratopan, 1823 to 1891. And this is a book in which that vessel is mentioned beside the George, the Glide, the Taratopan, and St. Paul, etc. And this is the dispensary. And now, I would like now just to say a little bit about my own heritage. I have had the opportunity and the good fortune of participating in two heritages. On the one hand, it is the Indian heritage, and on the other hand, it is the Swahili Arab heritage. And both, I have drawn from both of these. And I find that the questions which Firozbhai has been putting, actually there are answers already. If one understands the heritage of more than one community, then you begin to work out in your own way how to bring those two together and to be able to actually live with them, both, and not only live with them, but live with them creatively in a way that makes sense of what is to be human and what it is to be considered as part and parcel of both these heritages. One more point I would like to make in response to Firozbhai and Zarina Ben, and that is there has to be reciprocity. Reciprocity in the sense that whoever we are, however we define ourselves, we need to also not only to acknowledge others, but others to acknowledge us, who we are, as we are. And I think that is a very important point. In my own little way, when I was in school, I was taught Gujarati writing from age 6, or age 5 actually, how to write Gujarati, how to read, and also the kavitas that were given. That was my favorite subject, these kavitas. And one of the poems, and I've said this in another forum, is this poem by this poet called Dalpat Ram Dayabai Trivedi, 1820 to 1898. And he had written a poem called Gando Raja, Andheri Nagri Me Gando Raja, Takesher Baji, Takesher Khaja, and about an idiot king. And when I was at the University of London, my second year, 1962, I translated this, and this was published as Mfalme Juha in 1971. It was for a time a textbook, a school textbook in Tanzania. And somebody has even put this as his profile on YouTube. So there is, in a sense, this amalgamation of cultures, I think is possible. And it is the question, Mama, thank you for talking about this book, The Tyranny of Identity. I'll certainly look at it. But my own way of looking at identity is that identity is not only you give it to yourself, but others give it to you. You know, not only acquire, but you have to be given, you have to be acknowledged. That identity has to be acknowledged. How we do it is the thing. Now, coming very quickly then, I see my time is moving, coming to the youngsters. I feel that the youngsters, and I've written about this in terms of Swahili youngsters, what is happening is that this phrase which Firozbhai used, I think we need to unpack it. We owe a duty to India. What does this mean? When I was in Zanzibar, we were taught in the school a kawita, a poem. Hare dost chalo dada jina deshma. Now, we loved it. Later on, as I was in London, and then that poem came in my mind. Hare dost chalo dada jina deshma. What do we mean by that? You quoted Mamdani, Firozbhai. Well, apply Mamdani's analysis to that type of poem. And what is it that we are invoking? What is it that we are projecting? And I think that is something that we need to learn. Okay, I was talking about the Swahili youngsters. Swahili youngsters, a friend of mine and I, we are looking at Swahili youngsters in London. And three things have emerged. And I suppose these are applicable to the Indian youngsters, perhaps. One is that there is a degree of detachment. And that degree of detachment is, to me, inevitable, because they are growing up in London. They are growing up with a language which is now not Swahili. And in the case of Indians, it is not Gujarati. We, I think, lost out when we stopped one generation from writing Gujarati, reading Gujarati. I think that's one aspect. So there is a degree of a detachment when you look at East African Swahili. We're not like them. We are different. Okay, now that's number one. Secondly, you talked about the values. I think those values now are being integrated with Western values to a point that it would be very difficult to disengage the two, because those values now are becoming your own personal values. Whether we label them as Indian or whatever else, the reality is that they are now crafting for themselves, these young people, their own identity. We may not have a label for them so far, but it is developing. And that's point number two. Point number three, it is that now the world view is changing in terms of the demography, in terms of geopolitical aspects. They're no longer thinking of themselves as Swahili, or in this case, Indian. I don't think they do. My feeling and my observation is that they think of themselves as British, and then you can add British Indian, and then you need to define what British Indian is, and then you will find the same diversity which we had in East Africa is also among the British Indian, because now we have British Indian even more expansive than the diversity which we had in East Africa, because now we'll have British Indian from all over the world here, from Trinidad, from Fiji, from East Africa, from India itself, from Pakistan as a subcontinent of India, from Bangladesh, etc., etc. And this is the political mix, the social mix, the cultural mix that we are experiencing here in England, or in the UK, rather. And I think that is the reality of where we are today. So I would like to thank this program or this forum for bringing out these issues, because these are very important. And I would like us perhaps to integrate them with whatever studies are made on the ground as such. I think I had two more points that I wanted okay, and that is in terms of creativity. Again, this creativity is seen in music as well. And again, we see it here in London, what we call this fusion music and etc. Now, that's also becoming, if you like, a part of identity that we can be seeing and looking at. And finally, may I just touch upon what Zarina Bai had said in terms of education, and that is education, or in response to Farouk Virji, and that education has liberated women, but weakened the family structure. Okay, the question here is, what do we mean by the family structure, and what do we perceive as weakness? How has it weakened it? And I think that's how we perhaps need to look at it. In yesterday's paper, or day before yesterday, there was a woman writing, I think it was in either the Telegraph on Saturday or the Sunday Times today, one of the two, where she was saying that now she finds that now men actually, are finding doing domestic chores not something that they have to do, but simply that they need to do as a matter of course. So I think there is also that aspect of balancing between what women do and what men do, and how the two sort of are coming together. Perhaps we have a long way within the Indian community to achieve that balance, but I do feel that there are ways now slowly that we are getting it. Okay, I think I've done my best to keep within the time limit, Shamila. So I'll stop here, and thank you very much. And I'll stop sharing the screen. Thank you.
Excellent, Dr. Tupan. Thank you so very much for sharing all that you have. And, you know, while you were talking about the Swahili youngsters in particular, what came to my mind was that they've now evolved into global citizens. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yes, I would. And I think this global citizenship takes strands from various aspects of the original culture, perhaps unconsciously, but there is, and of course, there is diversity in the global citizenship as well. And I think, yeah.
Yes, thank you. So let me now take a question for you from Mr. Ashok Mulji. Can you unmute your mic, please? You're unmuted, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for Farouk Bhai, Zanzibari like me, that he has brought Zanzibar into the conversation, because so far I've noticed we were talking about mainly Kenya. Now, you got to remember that Zanzibar was the pioneer, in the sense all the people who came from Asia, particularly from Kathmandu, landed up in Zanzibar. Then they went on to the mainland. The other subject during the conversation I heard was that we don't contribute. No, Farouk Bhai mentioned that yes, Asian Indians did contribute. His family, in fact, I was born in Tharia Street, where he knows where it is, and his family contributed a lot. Jairam Shivji, which are now known as Swali, contributed a lot. The schools were built by the Asian. My grandfather's name is on the ESM school, which is called Yun Smith Madrasa. So Zanzibaris have played a lot of part. And in fact, I would say we never came across any problems living with the Africans, because we did integrate with them. We went to school with them. We played with them. And there were no problems whatsoever. Whereas I found on the mainland, the Asians in particular were aloof from the Africans. In Zanzibar, if you look at politicians. There were quite a few. Amir Ali Abdul Rasul, Rustam Sidwa, Ratti Balsara, and that sort of people were participating in Zanzibar. Unfortunately, the revolution happened and things changed drastically compared to what happened in Kenya, Uganda, or Tanganyika at that time. Zanzibar, we Zanzibaris, we don't call ourselves East African, we call Zanzibaris or Jangbaris. And that is the difference between, yeah, I see somebody, Muhammad Bai is laughing there, which is true. If you ask Farooq Bai, he'll say, I'm a Zanzibari, I'm a Jangbari. He won't say I'm East African Asian. No, we are Zanzibari. We are rooted there. We were born there. We were bred there. And our ancestors, grandfathers came from there. That's all I want to contribute so far. And please do not just talk about Kenya, talk about whole of East Africa, Uganda, Tanganyika, and Zanzibar.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much for your comment. Dr. Topan, would you like to respond?
Yes, I'd just like to respond one thing that we, if I may say so, Zanzibaris are uniquely conscious of ourselves. And I think we need to transcend that as well. And I think that is very important to sort of place ourselves within the, okay. But more seriously, I think the whole question of integration is something that has been studied, and it is complex. It is very complex because we are dealing with human beings, and each one has his own thoughts, his own agenda, and how to sort of advance one's interests. And I think these types of balancing acts, I think, are very important to sort of take into account. But more importantly, what I talked about reciprocity earlier, that also is important to look into. Okay.
Excellent, thank you. So we have Mr. Benegal Pereira waiting for quite some time. So go ahead, please, with your question. You're still muted.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes. Okay, let me just firstly say thank you to Mr. Topan. That was absolutely fantastic, superb presentation. So thank you, Farooq Topan, and also thank Mr. Noorauji as well for your very interesting perspective. And let me also echo your sentiments on Ramnik Shah, who I know very well, and I share that sentiment very much. But having said all of this, two things come to mind, and I have a question for you, Mr. Noorauji. I just started to reread some of Naipaul's work, okay, in particular, The Enigma of Arrival. And as you folks know, this is it has a lot to do with the identity and displacement of the different places that the writer had lived. So I would urge you to read this fabulous book that won the Nobel Peace Prize, okay? Not just A Bend in the River, which is another terrific story. So coming to the question for Mr. Noorauji, I heard you loud and clear on all the differences that we have with the Indo-Caribbean diaspora. That's great. But the question for you is, what lessons can we take from their experience in terms of, the multiculturalism, the cultural resilience in terms of integration, not just assimilation? And this may be a topic for another Zoom call, because I think there are lessons that we can take from other diasporas. Okay, not just the Caribbean. You can go to the Mauritian diaspora if you want. Okay, but there are lessons. It's not just our differences, but what can we learn from the parallel diasporas that we've read about? So that's the question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pereira. We'll give Mr. Noorauji a few minutes to come up with his response. Meanwhile, I'm seeing MK with his hand raised. Mr. Muhammad Keshavji, go ahead, please, with your question. You want to unmute?
Sorry, just a quick comment. I said, Ashok Bhai, you may find this funny. I was laughing because my wife is from Zanzibar and she had just gone down to sleep. And I thought if she heard this conversation, she would come back and be full force in this whole thing. So I was laughing. I said, She's just gone to bed, and I hope this whole conversation won't bring her back full force, because she's a very proud Zanzibari, Farooq, as you know. She says, I come from Zanzibar. Wherever we go, the first thing she puts up a big board. She says, I'm Zanzibari. Anyway, that's all I want to make a comment. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Ramnik Shah, do you have a question for Mr. Topan? For Dr. Topan, sorry.
Not so much for Mr. Topan, but I think I want to address the whole topic from a different perspective, and that applies to Firoz and Zarina as well as, of course, Farooq. Now, we have to give a compressed version of the story of the East African Asians. Let us take East African Asians as a collectivity. And what we have to remember is that although reference was made to the relative experience of Indo-Caribbeans and the South Africans and the Mauritians from the indenture perspective, the East African history is slightly different because, as was mentioned by all the speakers, there was already a settlement pre-existing the arrival of the British in East Africa, in Zanzibar and along the coast, of Indians who had been trading for generations. Now, when the Europeans came to split and dissect African subcontinent, the continent, into spheres of influence and so on. So when the railway project started in 1896, as Firoz said, the indentured element came into being then, but that was of a short duration and also in terms of numbers limited. The bulk of the settlement that took place, that exists now, took place after the building of the railway. And so the people who are now there are descendants of what Firoz referred to as the traders, who came as freelancers and people who came of their own volition, because the railway opened up the hinterland, and in the wake of the railway, the country began to open up, and there was economic opportunity, and people came to settle then. So the bulk of the population now are the descendants of those people, and the indentured element is a small proportion of that. Now, another,
okay, Mr. Shah,
yeah.
Mr. Shah, I think we have to invite you to do a presentation on your own. I think there's a lot that you need to share, and I wish we could hear you right now. Unfortunately, we are at that point where we need to bring today's program to a close.
Just one second. If you just give me now, what has happened is now, and this is Farooq also mentioned this. There is we talk about the diaspora, the globe in global terms. There is an Indian diaspora, but what has happened is that there is an East African diaspora which has sprung out of the Indian diaspora, which had a presence in East Africa. So what has happened? That aspect has not been touched at all, because come independence and after independence, there was a movement of people who came over and went over to Britain and Canada and the US and Australia later on. So these are the people who can say that they've sprung out of East Africa, they've sprung out of the East African Indian, East African Asians, and they refer to themselves as East African Asians here in Britain for example, there is a distinctiveness that they want to emphasize, that they are not Indians, that they have an East African origin, and that is the distinguishing factor. So there's a lot of issues here when we talk of migration and settlement and identity and nationality and ethnicity. So, you know, all these concepts are all mixed up. And I think Farouk actually referred to that. So there is a global aspect which we have to kind of align with what actually we feel in terms of personal identity. So that's the point I want to make. There's a lot of, it's a complex history.
Yes. Yeah, we would love to hear you further on that, and we would want to continue with our conversation. So I've taken your name and we will be contacting you. Thank you very much. Owing to the time, what I would like to do is I'm going to ask our three speakers to just make your closing comments. So we have Ms. Zarina Patel with her hand up. Please go ahead. You can comment, respond to all the questions and comments earlier, and go ahead and make your final closing comments, please. Kindly unmute, yes.
Thank you, Shamila. Just very quickly, because I realize, you know, we don't have time on our side, okay? Of course, always really missing in the discussion is anything about women. I guess we'll just have to keep on waiting for that to become a major topic of conversation. Maybe you should have a section just on women. That might do it.
We will do that.
Yes.
We will do that.
But I would like to just very quickly, because we haven't got the time, to say what I said at the beginning, that times have moved on. We have to stop being romantic and think of those early days when we were a small community and we all met together, sat together, and knew each other. Those days have changed. And the biggest change is class. And we don't want to talk about class. It is a taboo subject. And yet, it is what is driving the world today. And, you know, I think it was Viroz who talked about joint identity and the hospitality that we always show to people. I'll tell you one thing. This hospitality is only shown to some people. Because what we've done now, the rich have built their walls, they got their guards, they've got dogs, and the ordinary mechanic, laborer, the South Asian I'm talking about, forget about Africans, has absolutely no chance of entry to that house or that hospitality. That is the reality. And it is time we talked about it, because what it's done is it is stopping the working class South Asians to link up with the working class Africans, because they owe their loyalty to the rich South Asian leaders in their community. And that is class. We need to talk about it at some other discussion. Thank you.
We will do that. Thank you so much. Let's ask Mr. Feroz Naroji to make his closing comments, please. You need to unmute here. Still muted.
Okay. Thank you. I'll also take that opportunity to answer Benegal. Hi, Benegal. Thanks. What lessons can we pick up from each other. I think one of the lessons from the West Indies, subject to correction because I know little, is that there is to develop a non-consciousness of the differences. And that's a product of history. Such a thing in Guyana is a different thing from such a thing in Trinidad or in Kenya or for a short while, even in Zanzibar. So that's one thing. In that, helping is the issue of language. The more common a language is in society, the more broadly spread, the cohesion is better, the sense of togetherness is better. And that is what Farouk pointed out when he said, we lost a generation. And with that generation, we lost a lot of history, a lot of values when we could not write anymore in Gujarati or in Urdu or in whatever language we speak or used to speak at home. So language is an important, very important thing. And in East Africa, Kiswahili is now no longer a question of the coast or of Zanzibar. Kiswahili is from Congo in the Atlantic to Swahili itself into the Indian Ocean. It's got a huge number. We are now the East African community. So Kiswahili is a key aspect of every citizen of all these 6, 7, 8 countries now in the East African community. And that brings a natural, non-self-conscious identity. And Farouk, it also brings the acceptance of that identity from everybody else, just as we give identity to others and so on. So thank you very, very much, Sharima, Dr. Mabir, and to the President, and all the best for more. Thank you, Muhammad, again. Thank you, everybody. Bye, Farouk. Farouk, more in touch. We'll be in touch.
Okay, we will. Yes, thank you.
So let's have our closing.
Bye.
Let's have our closing comments from Dr. Topan, please.
Well, I'll be very brief and simply to say thank you for this wonderful session, because I think we have managed to get deeper a bit into 4 or 5 areas. In each of these areas, whether it is women, language, identity, demography, all these are very important. And perhaps in future, perhaps because I've not been part of these conversations before on this forum, perhaps in future we might want to look at, as Firoz Bhai said, what are the ingredients which make up Indian, Trinidadian or Caribbean identity? What is it? So that we learn. Today we told you. I think next time you tell us what we have. I think that would be my request. And by the way, when you do have this session on women, have men on it as well.
Excellent. Will do. Thank you so very much. We are so privileged because we have had excellent speakers, not just from the Indian diaspora who were children of the indentures, but now we do have you all. And I cannot tell you how honored we are that you all have spoken with us today and have shared these new perspectives that even we haven't thought of. Perhaps in some measure we have covered it, and we will be sending you via email the links to our website so that you could go back and you could look at all the programs that we've done, over 175 programs. So I'm sure some of the questions that you have about us can be answered by looking at some of those programs. And we would indeed love to have you all on every single weekend. You are welcome to join us every week, and we will be calling on you at some point in the future to perhaps appear on another program. So I want to thank you all so very much for speaking with us today. As I said, this has been an invaluable experience.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Mama, thank you for inviting me here. Bye-bye.
So I want to pass you all over now to Shakira to formally close the program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shaloma, for being a wonderful moderator. And this was an absolutely wonderful program. Thank you to our presenters. And thank you for taking the time to attend and to participate. And as we said earlier, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center and the Amina Ghafoor Institute for the Study of Indentureship and its Legacies, led by Professor David Davidine. And you can feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books and your reports and any papers that you have. And you can kindly give us your suggestions as well as donations and contact Dr. Kumar Mahabir for further details. We want to thank our advisory and planning team led by Dr. Kumar Mahabir for making this program so absolutely wonderful for over 3 years. Thank you to our IT manager behind the scenes, Ravin Ramsingh, who has been recording the program and will upload it to our website and to YouTube permanently for posterity, and to Miriam Mohammed for producing our TikTok videos. Our topic next Sunday will be interrogating the declaration of CARICOM as the 6th region of Africa. So please visit our YouTube channel to see all our past recordings. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyavad.